Most parents tell their children not to talk to strangers. But what happens when the danger doesn't come from a stranger at all, but from a number printed in a newspaper? In the summer of 1960, in the affluent Sydney suburb of Bondi, the Thorne family learned the answer in the most brutal way imaginable. Their story began with a miracle, a windfall that promised a life of ease and security. It ended in a ditch, with a secret so monstrous it would redefine innocence lost for an entire nation. This is not just a story of a kidnapping, it's the story of the day luck ran out. Basil and Frida Thorne were the embodiment of post-war optimism. Basil, a quiet, hard-working wool buyer, had scraped together a comfortable life for his family. Frida was the vibrant heart of their home, a warm and loving mother to their two children, 8-year-old Graeme and his younger sister. They lived in a neat red-brick bungalow at 30 Gilgallen Avenue, a quiet, tree-lined street where children played cricket on the road and neighbors knew each other by name. It was the kind of place where bad things weren't supposed to happen. Graeme was the picture of that safety. A bright, freckle-faced boy with a shy smile, devoted to his parents, a keen student, and a proud member of the local Cub Scout pack. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary, happy child. But ordinary was a luxury the Thornes were about to lose. The catalyst was a single ticket, number 197, for the Opera House lottery. In 1960, the New South Wales government launched this lottery to fund the construction of what would become Sydney's most iconic landmark. For a modest investment, thousands of Australians dreamed of hitting the jackpot. On July 1, 1960, the Thornes' ticket was drawn. The morning of July 7, 1960, was just like any other. It was a school day. At around 8:30 a.m., Graeme kissed his mother goodbye, slung his school satchel over his shoulder, and set off on the 3-block walk to Bondi Public School. It was a route he took every day. Frida watched him go. She would never see her son alive again. When Graeme failed to return home that afternoon, a low thrum of anxiety began. Frida called other parents, the school, anyone who might have seen him. The thrum became a drumbeat of panic. By nightfall, with no sign of Graeme, Basil Thorne made the call every parent dreads. He phoned the police. The initial investigation operated on the assumption of a lost child. Police and volunteers combed the beaches, the parks, the quiet lanes of Bondi. But as the hours ticked by, a more sinister theory began to take hold. The lottery win. The very public nature of their good fortune. Detective Sergeant Steve Cox, a seasoned and dogged investigator, was among the first to voice the terrifying possibility. This was no accident. What followed was a tense, high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The police decided to play along, hoping to catch the kidnapper during the ransom exchange. Basil Thorne, a man whose world had been shattered twice, first by euphoric luck, then by unimaginable terror, prepared the ransom money under police supervision. He followed the instructions to the letter, driving a nerve-wracking route through the city, the suitcase of cash on the seat beside him, his eyes constantly scanning for any sign of his son or his captor. But at every drop point, there was nothing. No contact. No sign of Graeme. The kidnapper was either spooked, or he was playing a cruel, sadistic game. The silence was more terrifying than any demand. As the hours stretched into a second day, the hope that had fueled the operation began to curdle into a dreadful certainty. Steve Cox felt it in his gut. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was becoming a recovery. Then the break came. But it was not the break anyone wanted. A couple walking their dog in the nearby seaside suburb of Seaforth made a grisly discovery. In a patch of scrubland off Bungalow Avenue, partially concealed under a piece of carpet, was the small, lifeless body of Graeme Thorne. The crime scene was one of profound horror. The boy had been bound, his school uniform disheveled. The cause of death was a massive skull fracture, likely from a blunt instrument. The pathologist's report would later detail evidence of a struggle and the heartbreaking fact that Graeme had probably been alive for some time after the attack. The promised land of their lottery win had become a landscape of nightmare. The kidnapping was now a murder. The public outrage was immediate and volcanic. Australia, a nation that still prided itself on a certain rugged innocence, was gripped by collective fury and fear. This was a new kind of evil, a crime motivated not by passion or poverty, but by sheer, cold-blooded greed. The press dubbed it the lottery of fear. Parents kept their children indoors. The police force was under immense pressure to find the killer. The investigation, now a murder probe, shifted gears. The ransom notes became the primary focus. They were typed on a rare model of typewriter, a Imperial Good Companion Model T. The paper was distinctive. The grammar and phrasing offered clues. It was a painstaking process, a needle in a haystack search through every typewriter salesman and stationery shop in Sydney. Meanwhile, the forensic team performed what was, for 1960, a minor miracle. On the piece of carpet used to hide Graeme's body, they found a single, crucial piece of evidence: a lone, red wool fiber. It was a synthetic fiber, uncommon for the time. This wasn't from a cheap blanket. It was from a quality item. This fiber became the investigation's silent witness. Then another clue emerged from the neighborhood. A milkman recalled seeing a car, a gray Zephyr Zodiac, parked suspiciously near Gilgallen Avenue on the morning of the kidnapping. He'd noted a partial license plate. It wasn't much, but it was a thread. The police began the monumental task of tracking down every gray Zephyr Zodiac in New South Wales. Weeks turned into a month. The trail seemed cold. Then, a detective knocking on doors in the suburb of Clontarf spoke to a Hungarian immigrant named Stephen Bradley. Bradley was a large, imposing man with a thick accent and a cold, aloof demeanor. He was a teacher of mathematics and lived with his wife and child in a rented home. He owned a gray Zephyr Zodiac. When questioned, Bradley was calm, almost too calm. He had an alibi for the morning of the kidnapping, claiming he was at a parent-teacher meeting. He allowed the police to look at his typewriter, a common model, not the Imperial Good Companion they were searching for. There was nothing to directly link him to the crime, but something about him set off alarm bells for the investigators. He was placed on a list of persons of interest, but without concrete evidence, they could do little more. The breakthrough arrived from an unexpected quarter, a furniture dealer. Police had circulated a description of the carpet found with Graeme's body. The dealer recognized it. It was a specific, high-quality Axminster carpet, and he had sold a large remnant of it just a few weeks before the murder. His records showed the buyer, a Mrs. Bradley of Clontarf. The police now had a direct link between the Bradley household and the crime scene. It was time to turn up the heat. They obtained a warrant and descended on the Bradley home. The search was meticulous. They found the main carpet, which perfectly matched the remnant from the dump site. Then they found a typewriter hidden in a cupboard. It wasn't the common model Bradley had shown them earlier. It was an Imperial Good Companion Model T. A forensic document examiner would later confirm it was a perfect match to the ransom notes. But the most damning evidence was almost microscopic. In the boot of Bradley's gray Zephyr Zodiac, forensic experts discovered more of those unique red wool fibers. They matched the single fiber found on the carpet remnant. And then they found something else, a single blonde hair. It was Graeme Thorne's. Stephen Bradley was arrested on August 17, 1960. The public had its monster. But who was he? The investigation revealed a man living a double life. Born in Hungary, he was an intellectual and a survivor. He had lived through the Nazi occupation and the subsequent communist takeover, experiences that had seemingly hardened him, stripping away any empathy. He had come to Australia seeking a new start, but carried with him a profound sense of entitlement and a simmering resentment. He was deeply in debt, living beyond his means, and obsessed with maintaining a facade of success. The Thorne family's very public windfall presented itself to him not as a happy story, but as an opportunity. In his warped mind, their luck was his solution. Bradley's trial began in March 1961. a media circus that captivated and horrified the nation. The prosecution, led by the formidable Jack Nagle, painted a picture of cold, premeditated evil. He laid out the timeline. Bradley reading about the lottery win, purchasing the carpet, typing the ransom notes, and stalking the Thorne household. The evidence was overwhelming. The carpet, the typewriter, the fibers, the hair. It was a forensic chain that linked Bradley inextricably to the crime. The defense argued that Bradley was not the killer, suggesting that he had indeed kidnapped Graeme, but that the boy had been killed by an accomplice who had since fled the country. It was a weak, transparent ploy. The climax of the trial came not with a bang, but with a chilling, quiet revelation. The prosecution needed to explain how Graeme had died in Bradley's car. They called a forensic pathologist who presented a theory so simple, so tragic, it sucked the air out of the courtroom. Graeme, he postulated, was a small boy, terrified and fighting for his life. Bradley, a large man, was driving. As Graeme struggled in the back seat, perhaps trying to escape, Bradley likely reached back with a single, powerful arm to subdue him. The blow, delivered with brutal force, had cracked the boy's skull against the hard metal frame of the car door. It wasn't a premeditated murder weapon. It was an act of panicked, brutal violence from a man who saw a child not as a human being, but as an obstacle. There was no accomplice. There was only Stephen Bradley, his greed, and his terrifying strength. The jury was out for just 3 hours. The verdict, guilty of murder. The sentence, life imprisonment, which at the time in New South Wales truly meant life. There was no celebration, only a grim sense of justice served for a crime that had stolen a boy's life and a nation's innocence. Stephen Bradley would die in prison years later, never having expressed a word of remorse for his actions. The Thorne family, left with their lottery money and a bottomless well of grief, tried to fade from public view. Their fortune was a cursed reminder of the price they had paid. They eventually moved away, forever haunted by the ghost of a freckle-faced boy who set off for school one morning and never came home. The Graeme Thorne case left an indelible mark. It led to changes in lottery laws, protecting the anonymity of winners. It showcased the power of forensic science in solving crimes. But, more than that, it became a dark, national folktale, a permanent cautionary note in the Australian psyche. It taught a terrible lesson, that good fortune can cast a long, dark shadow, and that sometimes the greatest threat is not a stranger in a dark alley, but a neighbor reading the same newspaper as you.